Good afternoon. It is 12:01 in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is the first Thursday of the month. So that means it's time for our monthly Lunch and Learn, sponsored by the Supply Chain and Logistics Institute at Georgia Tech, where we try to bring you topics relevant for the supply chain practitioner, the supply chain learner. And this month, we've got a great guest, an industry leader in his space, somebody who's committed to the practice and the teaching of a concept that I consider to be critical. So, Chris, we've titled it in a very fancy way, From Chaos to Clarity, Building Resilient Supply Chains Through Smarter Project Management. I would say, as I'm a devotee of this from my industry experience, is that the capability around project program management and the disciplines that come with it are a fundamental differentiator in the success or failure of large scale projects, which is why we consider it critical in our professional education, executive education, lifetime learning. And Chris leads our practice in that space. So without further ado, Chris, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you guys for the opportunity. Hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to jump into these slides. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you guys for letting me come in and take a little time this afternoon. I really love open Q&A, so I'm not going to kill you with a lot of slides, but I do like this title, this Building Resilient Supply Chains Through Smarter Project Management. And I want to give a couple of thoughts about what this can look like. One thing I'll do is I'll do just a very, very brief intro of myself and let you know, who is this joker you're hearing this afternoon at lunchtime. I do want to introduce you a little bit to our faculty team who teaches project management at Georgia Tech. But then I really want to jump into what I call like uncertainty 101. This is something we view in all of our projects. And this, when we say from chaos to clarity, I think this kind of puts things in perspective. I want to introduce a couple of academic things to you, but I really want to leave you with some practical thoughts this afternoon. We won't go super deep into the academia of this, but I do want to bring the practical application, the industry value. Things like the Stacy complexity model. We'll talk about some life cycle management approaches in project management. And I really want to leave you with three values, three very core values that I think if you investigate these values, you'll find, and what we're finding in the industry is that there are three big values that the highest performing organizations are taking very seriously. And then last but not least, I do want to put in a slight plug with my big brother, Chris Gaffney, and ISYE Supply Chain Logistics Institute. I do want to put in a plug about a joint interdisciplinary project, a supply chain logistics project management certificate. Okay, that was a long phrase, SCLPM certificate. And I'll probably ask him to give some thoughts about this. We're very excited. This is a new opportunity where you get the best of both worlds. And we'll tell you a little bit about how to register for that and have plenty of time for Q&A and open discussion on the topics of Uncertainty 101. Okay, so for you Star Wars fans out there, okay, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. All right, so I used to be at Georgia Tech as an undergrad about 25 years ago, and it was a really great time. This is an old picture of me. This is Chris Carter. This is me in school. Much better shape. My wife says, hey, she sees this picture. She's like, what happened to you, man? I said, well, I went to work. I think that's what happened. But, I studied industrial systems engineering. I went back and studied project management and post-grad at Georgia Tech. I ended up getting my PMP, getting my ACP. That stands for Project Management Professional, Agile Certified Practitioner. And I found myself building a career in Toyota. And that's where I work now as an executive in Toyota, our North American headquarters. But I also found myself coming back to Georgia Tech about 10 years ago, and I started teaching at Georgia Tech. So just a little bit about me and where I'm coming from, and definitely a techie through and through, but really excited to kind of bring you some insights from the last 10 years of teaching this stuff at Georgia Tech. This is the faculty team that teaches project management at Georgia Tech. You have myself there. I won't go through everybody, but we have over 150 years of real world experience. So everyone on this faculty team has worked in the industry somewhere around, I've been in the industry for 21 years. Most of these folks on the faculty team have been in the industry somewhere between 20 and 30 years. So we have a very impressive experience we bring to the classroom. Yet you have all of these fancy titles after our names. One thing you'll see in common is the PMP. One thing you'll see in common is the ACP or MBAs, and we have people that do research and curriculum. We have PMI Atlanta, the third largest chapter of Project Management Institute on the globe, and one of our faculty members was elected to be the chair of a 6,000 plus strong chapter of PMI Atlanta, and that's Joe Sisto. We love him so much. And so, just a little bit about our team who kind of brings this type of curriculum to life and teaches this type of curriculum at Georgia Tech. So let's talk about uncertainty. Uncertainty 101. It's there. Information technology. Think about, yeah, supply chain logistics. Absolutely. Energy, sustainability, new design, innovation. AI is changing everything. It is definitely the flavor of the month or the flavor of the next decade. Software development. There's so much uncertainty in this type of work. If you find yourself touching anybody in these type of realms, this type of work, there's so much uncertainty going on now, whether it's weather events or natural disasters, whether it's unforeseen tariffs and tax pressure and economic pressure, whether it's inflection points and major conflicts going on around the world that are disrupting things, or it's a new technology like AI that is challenging kind of the way we do work and the way we think about future opportunities in work. These are all positive or negative, but they're things we're uncertain about. And I think this is something that we can kind of label a little chaotic sometimes. It can bring chaotic. In the Fortune 500 companies, which is kind of in the background here, I want to call out a couple that are just hiding out in the shadows here. But, I have UPS in this image, big time supply chain and logistics company, right? You have automotive, you have major tech giants and automotive giants and computing giants and retail giants. And when you think about all these industries are impacted by this type of work. Okay. And so I want to bring you a little bit of how do we break this chaos down? How do we look at this chaos and how do we make clarity out of this? And that's why in academia, we love teaching this Stacy complexity model. If you haven't heard of it, I'm going to really give you a very quick introduction to this graph. I love this graph. I'm an engineer. I'm a nerd. I'm a project manager. So I love to look at things in terms of the x-axis and the y-axis. Okay. On your x-axis, you have a technical degree of uncertainty. In other words, how hard is this technically to solve? Are we looking at a problem or something we're uncertain about that we really think we can solve it? That would be low uncertainty. Or we really don't know how. We have no clue how to solve this problem. That's high uncertainty. On the y-axis, you have requirements. In other words, what type of resources or what type of things would be required, okay, in order to deal with this uncertainty. In the same way, low and high uncertainty. And in the case where you have kind of, simple approaches where you have the technology, you have the solutions, you have the resources, you know the requirements in order to solve this issue, we say linear approaches work well there, okay? And I'll talk a little bit about those approaches here in a moment. But you have this area of complicated and complex, and they just grow in a magnitude of scale. Things start getting complicated when they're kind of in the middle. It's kind of like, you know what? we have proven ways to solve this. We've used resources like this before. We know the requirements to solve this. That's but it's still a little complicated because maybe we're applying it in a different way. Or complex, where, okay, we're really uncertain if our known solutions will work. We have to experiment. We have to have more hypotheses. And we are not sure we have the type of resources identified or even know what type of resources we may need to solve this. That gets more complex. And then this chaotic place, this fundamentally risky area that we have no idea what to do and we have no idea what it would take. That's chaos, right? And what we're finding is that a lot of industry is starting to think about adaptive approaches. So some way to bring that chaos back down with some type of adaptive nature. And when we say adaptive approach, what we're trying to say is you can't predict it. You don't know what's going to happen because there's uncertainty. So you need to be able to adapt. You need to be able to change. You need to be able to be flexible. And we've heard about agile, and I'm gonna address that here in a moment. I'm not exactly talking about agile, actually, because I don't want to use that as a silver bullet. I've heard it used in many ways like a solve, a cure all. It's not. It's not. And I want to kind of guide you to why it's not. But one thing we want to think about when when we're managing uncertainty via life cycle approaches is, what are these life cycle approaches in project management? And what's the goal? What are you trying to do? I love this table. This is a table that we actually teach in some of our classes. And really, I want to read this table backwards. I don't want to start with whether you should take a predictive approach, an iterative approach, an incremental approach, or an agile approach, which is a combination of iteration and incremental building. Okay. I want to start with the goal. Sometimes you're really hyper focused on managing your cost. Sometimes you might be hyper focused on making sure your solution, that technical solution, is absolutely the best solution possible, the correctness of solution. Sometimes your goal is speed, like, hey, I just got to get this done. Like, we can go a little bit over on our costs. We may not have to be as accurate. We can fix it as we go along. And then sometimes your goal might be, hey, I have to be very frequent because I have a customer who values frequent delivery and they want to give feedback. But not everything is like that. Not everything fits inside these goals. Sometimes you have a combination of these goals. You want speed and cost, for example. That happens. So, as we look at this, there's some characteristics of these approaches, but I do want to pay attention to 2, 3, and 4. These are what we would identify as more adaptive approaches. These are things that you can repeat. You can have more frequent delivery. You can repeat until you get it right if the type of industry allows for that. But I don't want to not predictive, because predictive, still an industry which we also call waterfall. Waterfall is literally over a century old. That doesn't mean it's bad. The whole industrial revolution, the information age, the internet was built not on agile. It was built on predictive approaches. Most of your supply chain industries are still running on predictive approaches. These things are tried and true methodologies, so I don't want to knock that. But what we're finding is that an Agile is roughly about 24 years old from the Agile Manifesto in 2001. Okay. It works, and it was born out of software development. That's a good thing. But it doesn't work for everything. It doesn't work for all types of uncertainty, but it can help, and we can learn things from these type of characteristics of life cycle approaches. So when we look at all of these 4 type of life cycle approaches, another graph, I'm an engineer. I want to give you some ideas of like, okay, well, how do I know what type of things how should I be using project management life cycle approaches to deal with uncertainty in my projects, in my real job? So one more graph. I promise you, I think this is my last graph I'm going to throw at you today. But on the x-axis is degree of change. On the y-axis is frequency of delivery. So think about how much change are you trying to introduce? And think about how frequent do you need to give that to your customer or to your downstream next process, or who's waiting on you to deliver value. Now, if you've got a pretty low degree of change and you're like, hey, I'm doing something pretty steady, it's pretty known, and I'm going to deliver it maybe once or twice, predict is fantastic. But you're going to have a continuum in there. Not everything fits in one of these like quadrants, right? In the same way, if I need to deliver a lot, but deliver small pieces of it, that's incremental. If I have a lot of change I'm dealing with while I'm going through the process of delivering something, but I'm not going to deliver it that much, then I probably need to have iterations. Okay. And if you have high change and high delivery, especially this fits into things like software, which is a little bit more flexible and can change. Hardware typically cannot change as quickly. That gets into the agile world. But what I really want to focus on this slide are not the extreme points of the graph. I think most of us in most of the industry, they're living in the middle of this. So let me introduce the value of hybrid approaches to you. And I want to just say something real quick on this slide. Sorry, there's a lot of words here, but I actually took this from a textbook that we teach out of. I love this quote. It says, the goal of project management is this: to produce business value in the best possible way given the current environment. It does not matter if that way, that life cycle approach, is agile or predictive, or agile or waterfall. This isn't a versus thing. The question you want to ask is this: how can we be most successful? Now, I'm doing some research on industry best practices in project management. And what we're finding is that about 10 years ago, people were doing agile for the sake of agile. Agile for the sake of agile. Well, agile, silver bullet, it's the thing to do. It will solve all our problems. And 10 years later, they found out, no, it does not. We still have problems. We still have risk. We still have cost issues, resource issues, schedule issues. We still have to deliver. We can't iterate forever. This is what has been found out in the industry. And actually, there's studies, we have data from the past 10 years of which approach most PMOs and most performing organizations are taking. Now, predictive is the most popular approach. It's coming down a little bit, but it's by far the most popular approach in industry today. Agile had a steep curve from 2001 to about 2015, 2016, a very steep curve going up and catching up to predictive. But in the middle, this trend started happening where people started saying, you know what, I got to take some things that are iterative and I got to take some things from waterfall, put them together because I have to tailor and have the best fit for my project or my business environment. I can't just pick Agile and apply Scrum rules just because it's Scrum. I have to think about the work I'm doing. I may need a little bit of Scrum in certain parts of my project. In other parts of my project, I may need a waterfall schedule. Maybe I have a due date. It's not going to change, for example. But maybe I have a solution that's a part of my launch plan or my change I'm trying to introduce or my new product, my new service, my new result that I need a little iteration or incremental values to it. So this fit for purpose, being able to transition and having a combination of these approaches, that is what we're seeing the high performing organizations do. And actually last year, for the first time, the research showed after surveying, over about 200 industries internationally, not just in North America, this is an international survey, that hybrid approaches are now overtaken agile approaches as far as the selection of being used. And predictive still coming down, but and my prediction is in the next 10 years, hybrid will be the mainstream approach for project management. It will not be an agile or predictive, it will be hybrid. It's a tailoring for the best fit. So I just want to leave you with that first value as we get into these values. That is a huge tip, and that's what we're seeing high performing teams do. They are fitting it to what works for their business. The second value I want to leave you is the value of proactive risk management. This is something else that's just not going away. And something I hear a lot in the industry that is kind of one of my things that grinds my gears or sets my heart on fire is this thought that a problem happens, and when a problem happens, some executive says, we need risk management. And I'm like, no, you need problem solving. You need problem solving, and problem solving is a good thing, and you need to be able to solve complex problems. But that's not risk management, because problem solving is reactive to the problem that happened. Risk management, real risk management, is a process that begins at the beginning in your planning phases of your projects. It happens in planning. All these steps I'm showing here, all of these steps, identifying your risk, trying to predict what can happen ahead of time with all your stakeholders, listening, making a very robust risk analysis of both qualitative risk or quantitative risk you may have, things you saw in previous lessons learned or historical analysis, and then planning your risk responses in advance and assigning them to somebody to own it at the beginning when your project work kicks off. Man, that's a beautiful thing if you can put in that time. And it's an amazing thing. And then you have people waiting for something to happen. And they've put a contingency aside. Just in case this happens, we have a backup plan. We have a plan B, just in case. Whether we're mitigating or we're going to avoid and cut scope for that risk, or we're going to transfer that risk somehow with insurance, for example. That's a great example. I'm sure many of us that are listening to this call have bought a home before. If you are a homeowner, you can understand this type of thinking way. When you bought that home, at the beginning of buying that home, you didn't wait for something to happen in your home. In fact, the bank that you had your mortgage through, they would not even allow you to buy that home unless you purchase insurance and you prove you had homeowners insurance. You know what that is? That's risk management. That is a great example of proactive risk management. I am getting insurance. So if wind damages my roof, or a flood happens, or a fire happens, Lord forbid, but if these things happen in my home, I have a risk response plan called insurance. Now, did you wait for the fire to happen to say I need insurance? I hope not, because most insurance companies would not take you. You guys see the point. It hits home, I hope. But the part where you actually will implement risk responses is if a risk is triggered, if a problem happens. But the beautiful thing is, problems that happen and projects that have good proactive risk management that are planned way up front, by the time a problem happens, if you had it in your risk management plan up front, you got somebody you can call who's a risk owner who owns that risk response plan. And they're like, oh, it did happen? Okay, great. We've been having this in our back pocket the whole time, anyways. And it's such a beautiful thing to see, but it's often not practiced in industry. In fact, I see a lot of projects fail because of the lack of proactive risk management. Okay, so value number 2 I'm dropping on you for today. And the last thing, the value of continual training. Small plug here about PMP and PMI and Agile Certified Practitioner. These are industry license. These are professional certifications that we do support at Georgia Tech. We are actually nationally accredited by PMI, the Project Management Institute. We are nationally accredited, so we're very, very happy to talk about the value of these. We see people building not only their technical skills, but they're building their leadership skills. And what we're finding is that the best project managers out there now in all kinds of industry work, they know how to lead their teams, but they also know how to lead cross-functional stakeholders in an organization. They're not just schedule builders or cost managers or managing scope and scope creep. They're not just doing those classical jobs of risk management and et cetera. Even though they are technically versed at those jobs, they're becoming organizational leaders, people leaders, knowing how to negotiate, remove barriers from situations, knowing how to gain influence in an organization. This is now becoming a huge part of the focus of both of these certifications. And I love that. One of my favorite ones is conflict management. And I think it's really important that we teach conflict management, because a team and an organization, if they have a conflict and they cannot learn to resolve it well and align, they will be slow to implement any solutions. And it also can be caustic for the working environment. So I've had 20 years, over 20 years at Toyota and 10 years at GT in the background. I've worked in multiple countries, including Japan, North America, and Canada. And I'll tell you, in my experience, I have to say, it is not just the technical skills that really help you in your career. It is a blend of having good core job experience, but also very good people skills, and especially conflict management. So I want to impress on you, whether it's PMP or ACP or not, get training, go back, get more education, learn these things, keep growing in your career paths. So I just want to leave you with that last value, because it's been valuable for me in my career. So speaking of training, that's all the knowledge I'm going to drop on you for today. I'd love to have more time for Q&A, and that's my favorite part, so I didn't want to lecture you for 40 minutes or longer. But I do want to tell you a little bit about a new certificate program we have in partnership with our School of Industrial Engineering and Supply Chain Logistics Institute. It's the Supply Chain Project Management Certificate, and this is actually what the cert looks like. It's awesome. And my end of this is bringing you those business acumen skills and strategy with this first class called Comp 7300. and then an enterprise project management course that really goes in depth about teaching you those technical and leadership skills called Comp 7360. I want to pass the buck to my big brother, Chris Gaffney, and bring him off the microphone just to talk a little bit about these courses in supply chain logistics.
Thanks, Chris. And I would highlight an element of all three of your key values. I do ac- accept the fact that in my 30 plus years of dealing with increasingly complex projects, they all have curveballs, right? It's no different than, a football game plan or whatever. Yes, you practice. Yes, you build the plan. Yes, you train the plan, but in-game adjustments are just reality. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I've come to believe in the core skill sets that we got in our legacy waterfall project management, training, but then enhancing those with elements. So the hybrid approach, I'm sold, basically got religion by experience. And I think your second value, for me, is now in any large scale project. We did a greenfield production facility build in some of my consulting work prior to Coke, and just bringing an FMEA into the cycle with the team at the origin of the project, and then
Mm-hmm.
forcing it back onto the agenda with senior leaders at least quarterly to say, do you acknowledge that these risks exist, right? Then we go through the triage of likelihood of occurrence. If they happen, what's the impact? What's our ability to detect? And say, are we comfortable with awareness of these risks without action? And in some cases, they'll say, no, well, we agree on what the risk looks like and let's take some action.
Mm-hmm.
Quarterly, we refresh based on actions we've taken and new information. And forcing that into the process, I think, is a huge value add if you're doing this on behalf of an internal client or you're serving a client in a program management capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think on your third value, um, I think that's probably the biggest so what. Um, I took project management. You and I've had this story. It was an elective when I was an undergrad. We're working on getting it back as an elective, and I've only leveraged it for 40 years, and I say that in all sincerity. It got me exposed to change the business events, right? We always say, are you running the business and changing the business? And if you're going to be a leader, you've got to have some capability to do both. And it's, one of the key skills we put in one of our latest articles around the skills that are going to survive AI. Being able to deliver results is a key differentiator as a human. And it's one thing to say you gave me one task and I did it. It's another thing to say, can I be part of a group that leads, 1,000 task effort? You go through those experiences, they are a leadership accelerator. So if you're an
Mm-hmm.
individual, this is why you get in this field. If you're a leader, why should I train my organization? This is a training ground. And all you're going to get out of here are people who have the battle scars, but are capable of handling something more complex. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, those are my passion points amongst many in this. So then let's talk about the cert. And as you and I have worked together now, approaching 2 years, for the audience, I want you to understand that our project management certification practice as part of Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech Professional Education, the College of Lifetime Learning, is the largest um, driver of students beyond our online master's programs. It's in the many hundreds. It's consistent over many years. It's got a growth path, and that's because it works. Okay. Um, and selfishly for us from a supply chain world, when Chris and I started working together, we said, there are aspects of supply chain project management that are unique, or excuse me, project management that are unique to managing supply chain projects. If you're managing um, a software launch, if you're managing bringing a large new customer in as a 3PL, if you're dealing with a large um, infrastructure project, building expansion, new line in a production facility, big product project launch, you have some unique challenges in managing these projects in the supply chain space. So I kind of said, how do we find a way to kill two birds with one stone? How do we help the audience of people who are dealing with a large facility project, okay, and need a depth in project management enough to be able to qualify them to take a PMP exam. And so that's how we conceptualized this. Chris and I sold this in, and we now have this available as an offering for someone who's willing to combine two of our kind of bread and butter project management courses with three of our supply chain and logistics functional specific supply chain courses. You can get this cert. So that's our concept. That's our, as we've talked to both public and private audiences, we hope and think this is something that can kind of, if you will, kill two birds with one stone.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks, Chris. It's awesome. So, just a little bit of registration. If you're interested in that, sometimes people look at project management agile as well, and they're like, "Hey, what should I do?" Right? And just a shout out to supply chain there, that's in the top of the left box, and kind of pointing to the CERT programs. And just want to give you guys a link of where to go if you want to take a moment and capture this link. It's pe.godtech.edu. Certificates, supply chain management, supply chain project management certificate with dashes in between. It is that simple. It'll take you to a page. One cool note that you heard Chris say, and I'll reiterate this, is it provides your 35 hours towards the PMP exam. So after taking those courses, you would have the educational contact hours required to apply for the PMP exam. That's pretty cool. And yep, we did that one on purpose. We wanted to make sure. If you guys have any questions, you can always email us at projectmanagement@pe.godtech.edu. We have our head TA. Her name is Mia Johnson. She has that inbox. She fields many, many questions from students. She has a really good detailed FAQ, including more information about how you can take the supply chain project management certificate. All right. So thank you guys for your time. I think we're right past the 30 halfway mark. I think it's 33 past the hour. So we have plenty of time for open discussion and Q&A. And at this point, I'm going to minimize my screen just a little bit so I can see you a little bit better and interact. But this has been fantastic. Thank you again for the time.
So, Chris, we've got a couple questions in the Q&A box, which is where we want them. And I acknowledge John Durgovich because John has commented on a couple of things. And also, it's got a couple questions. His first comment was, if I'm at delivering as a project manager, sometimes my customer is my source of uncertainty, right? Customer is under stress. They may be doing a project because their business is under stress. So I think that's a good point. Sometimes it's not this external variability of the environment or the difficulty of the project. It may be the client environment for sure. So I think that was his first comment. And John, I may have you put your second comment back into the open Q&A and I'll comment on it. But the questions that John has asked, and I would encourage others to throw questions in. We would love to get more in here. But he says, what do you feel are the key risks and opportunities of the AI revolution? So maybe both of us can take a run at that, if you'll take a first run at that.
Yeah. John, I mean, excellent question. It is the flavor of the year, the flavor of the past, couple of years, and probably gonna be the flavor of the next 5 years or so. I think risk. Let me say one thing about risk, and I said this about uncertainty earlier. It's not always negative. Sometimes it's positive. Sometimes you want to maximize, that opportunity, or you want to minimize the threats. Right? We always say that: maximize the opportunity of risk, minimize the threat of risk. And risk is defined, from an academic standpoint, risk is defined as an uncertain event or condition that either has a positive or a negative impact. It has a very simple definition like that. And I love that definition. So when I think about, artificial intelligence, right now everything's about what we call predictive AI. Okay, that's the prompt. That's the prompting. In other words, we are. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I said that. Generative AI. Everything today is about generative AI. That's the prompting. So that's I ask AI something, and it generates some reply or response or output from my prompt. Does that make sense? Generative AI. That's what everyone's really excited about. Your chat GPTs, your There's many items out there now. Everyone has one. Um, that's generative AI. Now, in the future, okay, and that's causing some risk. That's causing risk to some people's jobs. Some people view that's causing risk to their jobs because you can take certain jobs, and because of generative AI, you can prompt for something we used to do, right? And AI can get it faster and sometimes more accurate and quicker than the human can. Okay, that's a risk of generative AI, but it's also transforming jobs. Instead of it maybe taking away jobs, it's changing jobs. So there's a positive side to that, because if you learn prompting, you can use that to enhance your own work, right? I will also say that what's next is predictive AI. And this is not yet the flavor of the month, but this is what your Microsofts and Googles and open source AIs, they're chasing this, right? And they're already doing a lot of research in so many areas. But predictive AI is the lack of a need for a prompt. It's the AI saying, I will prompt myself. So this is kind of like Skynet, or the Matrix a little bit here, for those of you who know Terminator. Anyways, this is that predictive AI is pretty interesting, and there's definitely a lot of risk there. There's positive risk and negative risk. That predictive AI, if it doesn't need a prompt, then where goes the prompt engineering job, right? And if prompt engineering is a new skill that can enhance many jobs out there now, how would predictive AI, if it understands what those prompts are, those normal prompts, and it understands how to answer those prompts on its own, it doesn't have to have the human to kick it off, right? That's the difference. Generative AI always has to have the human input first. Predictive AI, hypothetically, doesn't need the human input. So there's a lot of risk and opportunity in AI, and I'm just giving you a view of it. I'm not telling you anything very specific. I'm just giving you a way to view what's coming in that space. I think the most important thing for us to do to manage that proactively, however, is to think about how it will transform our work and our ways of working. That to me is the most proactive thing, to continue to learn. That training point I put in there is that third value. I could equally say training in AI applications, training in AI as it affects supply chain, as it affects project management. One of our faculty members on my team, he's doing a whole research analysis paper right now on AI's impact on business transformation. That's the title of the paper. It's an 80-page paper, and it's pretty intense. And so I want to pass it to Chris. Any comments there? But I do want to just leave you with that thought. Continue to get trained, continue to keep up the trends, continue to learn. I think that's going to be really critical. Those who can adapt and learn with AI and grow with it will be good in their future.
Thank you, Chris. And I will add my thoughts. And again, thank you, John. And then Sanj has got a question I'm going to come to next. So thank you, Sanj. You did answer or you did raise your hand. So we'll see how I do on the answer. And if you need to follow up, that's great. So what I would say for me is, being a more senior person, diving into the technology, and talking and engaging with a lot of people on this. We'll have our advisory board meeting tomorrow. This is a hot topic for them. We're teaching our generative AI class next week in Savannah and online to a sold out audience. So we've got people's attention. We're talking to industry and other academic folks about where this is going. The reality is the ship is sailing, right? So it's not like we're going to undo. So very much we advocate that you've got to get in the pool. I do think it's interesting. I read a survey that came out literally today, and it said most employees are bullish on how this is going to help them, and that's the today state. Um, and I think for most of those folks, what they're doing is they're getting in the pool. All right, they're using the tools in their personal life, and in many cases, the use of their tools in their personal life are ahead of what their companies are doing. So, what we are advocating and do advocate in our courses is for companies to have a defined AI policy around what's acceptable use, fair use, how are we going to proactively engage our teams in it. I think what we would say is, um, those people are going to swim above the water, right? As this technology evolves, they will be equipped to leverage the benefits of it, which will differentiate their capabilities and their work. Um, I think it is going to evolve work, as we've talked about, right? If I say it's saving me 10 plus hours a week, and I do, long term, there's an implication in terms of what happens to my hours. And if I've got 5 analysts who say the same thing, what's it going to do to the pool of analysts? And so I acknowledge that. And I think we essentially say we want people to be well equipped. We have an article we wrote, Skills That Will Survive AI, and maybe Andy can put that in the chat for those who haven't read it. We're going to talk to our board about that tomorrow and see if they believe what we say or not. And we'll get their feedback on that. I think, my view is long term, it will change. It will change work, but mostly in a positive way. I would suggest that for most of the people I worked with in frontline supply chain roles over the last 20 to 30 years, it wasn't a winnable game, right? They had more work than time. Analysts didn't analyze because they were dealing with non-value added work. Planners didn't plan because they were dealing with non-value added work. We want to at least get to the phase where we equip those planners and analysts and folks on the execution side to have a winnable game, because I think there's a lot there. I do believe also, and we've said this in our articles, that there are a lot of edge cases in the real world of supply chain. Supply chain is not a static world. We've got the Waymos here in downtown Atlanta, and guess what? They're restricted to a defined box of roads where they've done extra work to try to isolate the edge cases, but they don't travel all around Atlanta because there's too much variability. So I think that's a reality in a physical supply chain, and we advocate employees to get close to that edge, get close to the front line and the context, and you'll always be a winner in the world of AI. So that's kind of my thoughts, John, on your two questions. And then I think the comment and the provocative point that was raised was, I think Sanj said, I think agentic AI will eliminate 80% of supply chain work. I haven't seen any survey or any professional who suggests anything to that level. So I'm going to say, Sanj, I acknowledge your perspective. I probably feel like it's going to be a game changer, but not like that. And I think it's going to take a long time. You have to remember that our economy is composed of very large mega companies like the Amazons and the Coca-Colas and the Googles and the Metas, but our economy is very deep with much, much smaller companies. We're going to have in our advisory board a lot of companies that haven't even scratched the surface on AI. And I do think where you work may look different in a few years. You may be going from a company that's on the leading edge of automation and leads fewer people, and bring your leading skills to more mid-sized, smaller companies who don't have that. So I'm still pretty confident that for most people in the supply chain world are coming in, there's another 20, 30 years of good work. So I think we've got plenty of time. I think you just want to be someone who's in the pool getting skilled up on these technologies.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also comment, Sanj, I appreciate the comment as well. I don't think it will minimize the resources. Let me say something about resources. Resources is a broad category. Um, there's lots of types of resources, right? I think what AI will do is and let me say one more thing about resources. How many of you have ever had too many resources?
Seldom.
Ever,
Seldom. Yeah.
ever. If we had too many resources, we always have a problem of scarcity. My point is that human resources being one of the greatest resources that we have outside of technology, cash, equipment, materials. But human resources, I still believe, is the most powerful resource that is in the highest demand. Still, um, I've consulted for different Fortune 500 companies. Of course, Toyota being one of them. We always have a resource problem every single year for the last 2.5 decades that I've been living in this space. Every year we talk about resource challenges. And as a huge of a company globally as Toyota is, for Toyota to say that continually, we have resource problems. AI, what we're finding is a way for resource efficiency. Doesn't mean we need to remove the jobs. What it does mean, and Sanj, I hope some of my replies to you in the chat were helpful. It may mean we have to change the roles and responsibilities, however. They may have to evolve. I've been doing the thought about a project manager today, maybe an AI governor in the future. In other words, they used to manage the project. Now AI may manage the project, but the human will manage the AI about how are you managing the project. Does that make sense? So
Yep.
those type of situations may come in the next, 2 decades or so. We may see those evolutions of role and responsibility.
So Chris, Sanj says, can I jump on the mic and give you my rationale? So Sanj, I'm going to allow you to
Yeah.
speak. So let me see if this works. So hang on. Go ahead and unmute, Sanj. Let's see if
Yeah.
you can speak
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me?
loud and
Hmm.
clear. Thank you for jumping
Okay.
on.
So, so the word AI is very confusing. Everyone uses AI and it means everything, first of all. So we are not talking AI. We're talking how much of supply chain is repetitive. If you have the sections of repetitive work, it will be done more precisely with lot less error by non-human.
Hmm.
Now, a human may be typing in 10 keys on the keyboard instead of sitting 8 hours. That's all. So there will still be a person, but unless there is something where you're looking at a new way of distribution or a new way of doing something, that would be challenging for a computer. But if you look at most of the time, about 70 to 80% of the work is repetitive. And then the only thing one person would be doing is looking at it before it goes to the next stage, or if everything is done. As an example, uh, someone comes to you, says, what is the current inventory? Give me the current distribution of how many things being sold since morning. A person might take 2 hours to do it. A computer will do it in 10 seconds. So all these things would be very more productive, effective, and eventually, as a owner of a business, once you see these things, it's technically impossible for a person to do it at that speed, other than certain type of tasks. So I see 70 to 80%, because some supply chains would be different, but most of them, if they are repetitive, they will be replaced. And that's a fact. I'll give you one example. If you go many years back, many years back, the printing was done by printing press. So there was a profession, a person who used to put boxes there before it gets printed on a paper.
Hmm.
Once those regular printers came, so there will be new opportunities, but will be of different type.
That's right. That's right.
But it will go away.
So
Sanj, we
Sanj,
appreciate you jumping on. Chris,
Thanks.
I'll let you comment. I'll do the
yeah,
same, and we'll wrap a bow.
I completely agree with you, Sanj. But the only thing that I'll offer another perspective is repetitive work. Um, we are very familiar with repetitive work, and since the Industrial Revolution, and I would even say when robotics was introduced in assembly lines in factories, and many types of assembly lines in factories, whether you're talking about semiconductors, automotive, whether you're talking about even the creation of computers itself, robots are used. And the same argument was applied to robots. So if you go back about a century or so and you study the introduction of robotics on the assembly line, everyone said the same thing they're saying about AI, close to your statement. Oh, we're all going to lose our jobs because robots will replace us all. And certainly, if you've been in the modern day factory, it is very much so autonomous with robots. But what's interesting is that it didn't replace all the repetitive work because maintenance was required for those robots, et cetera, et cetera. I'll go back to the point. It's the changing of roles and responsibilities. It's not necessarily the removal of the resources, because again, we have scarcity. If we didn't have scarcity, then I think there would be more of a concern if we didn't have scarcity. But scarcity still forces us to find ways to use human resources. So even if the repetitive work is replaced by AI, I still strongly believe that it'll be similar to what we saw with robotics, that there will just be a transformation of the way of working that the human work will transform to. It won't necessarily just replace the human work. I've seen large scale body weld robotics plants that are larger than a football field and filled with robots, but filled with hundreds of people as well. But their work changed. So I just leave you with that example from the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, and I would say it's a win too, right? And that win may be a long time. But Chris, we've done it. We have consumed a good amount of time, and I do appreciate that. Um, and I think we got some good stuff out there, exactly what we want. And I love the audience awareness. I would commend. Andy noted we've got upcoming classes. In this space, strategic project management, both November and December, enterprise project management in March. You could do warehouse layout anytime, and we've got lean warehousing on the calendar. And as always, please check our online space and look for both our next webinar next month, same time. We're going to be talking sustainable productivity, Chuck Easley and I, and we've got a nice AI ethics topic for December. So, Chris, I appreciate it as always, and appreciate the audience engaging with us on another successful webinar. And again, this will be available a week from now on YouTube if you want to share with your friends. So, Chris, final word to you.
All right. I just want to say thank you guys for the time today. Very thought-provoking and juicy conversation. So I really appreciate the engagement from John, Sanj, and others. And I'll just say I encourage you to keep learning. I really believe that life is about learning. And this whole College of Lifetime Learning that we find ourselves a part of at Georgia Tech, that's what we're trying to promote. So that's why we have this Lunch and Learn. And I really appreciate the Supply Chain Logistics Institute for hosting such events. And I look forward to seeing you again sometime. Thank you, everybody, for your time today.
Y'all have a great day.